F1 on BBC Radio 5 Sports Extra.
Two-thirds of the way into the Formula One season, and round 17 of the FIA Formula One World Championship is taking place at Baku in Azerbaijan, and we're looking forward to the third free practice session coming underway in just a few moments' time. My name is Ben Edwards. Alongside me is former McLaren mechanic and presenter nowadays, Mark Priestley, and also F1 correspondent for the BBC, Andrew Benson. Mark, lovely to have you with us today. Baku, always a challenging place. We enjoyed some good action in the first two practice sessions yesterday, the odd incident into the wall, into the barriers, and I imagine we might see a bit more of that today.
It's one of those circuits, isn't it? It's a very much street circuit, but unlike a sort of typical street circuit like a Monaco or a Singapore, it does have a very, very fast section, and the teams are always trying to balance giving maximum downforce for the real tight and twisty stuff, the sort of 90-degree corners where you've got to be hard on the brakes and get maximum traction out of those corners back up to speed. You've got to balance that where you need downforce with a really high speed, a 2-kilometre long flat-out section at the end of the lap, for which you need no downforce and minimal drag. So it's about balancing that in your setup. Well, if you take the downforce off the car, you get less grip through the tight and twisty stuff, and it becomes a challenge to drive. So we see a lot of mistakes around it, and the walls, of course, are very close.
They are very close. And I was looking back at the history of qualifying. I know we're not into qualifying yet. We're going to be into final practice. But often there are red flags during qualifying. Somebody will often crash out in Q1, and we get a pause. And, of course, that can make life a little bit difficult. If you haven't put a lap in yet and there's a late red flag, you might miss out. Or everybody then has to dash out for one final lap with just a couple of minutes to go. So a lot of this can make it quite unpredictable.
Yeah, totally. Because if somebody does have an issue, whether they hit a wall or break down, have some incidents, it tends to block the circuit because it's quite narrow through that old part of the town. So the teams have to factor that in with their run plan. You know, you got to think about getting a sort of early banker lap in to mitigate against something like that happening and ruining the sort of one flying lap you might be on the good fresh set of tyres. So the teams have to think carefully about this. The drivers, of course, have got to be careful when it comes to it, particularly later on in qualifying, but it's a strategic sort of run plan, much more so than perhaps at other tracks.
It's a rather cloudy day in Baku today. We haven't got the sunshine that we had yesterday. Temperatures come down a little bit. It's around 27 degrees, but the track temperature is definitely lower than it was yesterday. It's only just over 30 degrees. It was cleaning up a little bit yesterday, clearly, with more cars going out, Formula 2 out, other support races also cleaning up the track. It was incredibly slippery when they first went out in FP1, and they were about 4 or 5 seconds off the pace, but that was gradually coming down as we went through the day.
Yeah, it's one of the circuits that has a real high sort of track evolution as the weekend goes on. Of course, there's no racing done on this. It's not a permanent racetrack, so for most of the year it's just road cars tootling around. They're not putting rubber down on the circuit, they're not clearing away any dust and debris. That only happens when the racing cars get on it for this weekend. So as the weekend progresses, the lap time should come down and down, and often quite dramatically. So yeah, the more running we get, the more advanced the lap times will become.
Let's bring F1 correspondent Andrew Benson in. Andrew, this track, we're just looking down into the pits at the moment, and we've got the youngster Oliver Behrman, who is coming with Haas this weekend in place of Kevin Magnussen. He did a pretty good job yesterday. We'll see how he gets on today. Ferrari have always qualified extremely well at this track, particularly over the last 3 years, with Leclerc taking pole position every 3 years, but they haven't actually taken a victory here. Red Bull have dominated the last few years here at this circuit, but it is really quite unpredictable at the moment, isn't it, as to who's going to be top?
It's unpredictable generally in Formula 1 at the moment, Ben, and it was unpredictable yesterday as well. It was really hard to read yesterday. Charles Leclerc ended the day fastest, as you say, but he had quite a difficult day. He crashed in the first session, and then when they got him out in the second session at the start, he said something felt bent in the car. They changed something. He didn't say what it was, but he said it was not to do with the crash. It was a new part that they'd fitted that hadn't gone wrong before in the same way. Once he was out on track, he was fine, but he was running later than everybody else, so the track conditions were better. One of the other teams estimated that when he set his fastest time, the track was 3 or 4 tenths faster than it had been when Perez had set the second fastest time. And actually, so between Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes and McLaren, it was really hard to judge who was in the best shape. McLaren looked like they were nowhere. Piastri was 5th and Norris was down in 17th after getting blocked by Pierre Gasly's Alpine on his fastest lap. But Norris's lap was basically matching Perez's lap almost to the 1,000th until that moment. So he looked quick, but then when he got out of the car afterwards, he said he felt that McLaren were quite a long way off. Now, I don't know whether that's kidology or not, but it means that we go into Saturday with, as you say, these quite unexpectedly cloudy conditions. It's normally blue skies in Baku, and the lower temperatures help Mercedes, by the way. So we really don't know what's going to happen. And just a final point on Ferrari. Leclerc was fast. He's always fast here. He's brilliant around this track. There's something about street circuits and this type of corner that he really revels in. The pole lap in 2021, when that car was not competitive at all, was just stunning. None of those wins he hasn't taken from pole have been his fault. One was tyre degradation was too extreme. The other one was the engine blew up. Actually, this year Ferrari, they're stronger on race pace than they are on qualifying pace. They've made a deliberate effort to switch that around in their car. So it's going to be really interesting to see if he can actually get it on pole as normal, if you like, for Leclerc in Baku. He actually might be quite hard to beat because of that.
It's a very good point. There was we've got the track just opening up now, and Max Verstappen is on circuit. We've just got a few cars beginning to come out of the pits. Interestingly, last year in Q3, in that final part of qualifying, Mark, Verstappen and Leclerc did exactly the same time. Initially, it changed in this, when they went out again. But the first part of Q3, when they do their first flying run, they did exactly the same time, to a thousandth of a second. Yeah. If it had stayed that way, Max would have got it, because his lap was actually done just before Leclerc. So that's how they decide. If you do the same lap time, if you're the first to do it, you get the position.
It's close, isn't it, right now? And it's Formula One's in a great place, because of that. We're sort of nearing the end of a fairly stable sort of rules cycle where the cars are just evolving rather than massive revolutions, and that's bringing everyone closer and closer. Is Perez.
It is a little bit damp, the truck.
I was actually just going to say, on the shot we've just seen, I've seen some spots of rain coming down, so it only looks very, very light, and I'm not sure expecting anything too much heavier than that. But Perez just confirming it's a bit damp. But yeah, Formula One's getting closer and closer. We expect it to continue into 2025, because again, the cars just roll over effectively before the big change comes in 26. So what we've got right now is a championship this year shaping up to be really exciting. I fully expect it to carry on into next year as well. We're in a great time in F1.
We are. No, we're very lucky at this stage. There's no doubt about it. And going into this last third of the season, there's a lot of unpredictability. Sergio Perez in great shape yesterday, as he has been at Baku many, many times, with those two victories he's had, plus the sprint win he had last year as well, actually. And he wasn't on pole for the sprint race either. Leclerc was on pole for the sprint race. He was on pole for the main race. But Perez went on to win both races last year, funnily enough. Just looking at the performances over the year so far and how things have been gained and lost in terms of performance from Bahrain to Monza, which was the previous event, of course, and McLaren the biggest gainer over Red Bull. And on this system, that the graphics that we've got, they've gained over 3/10. Sauber gone completely the other way. They've lost 3/10 along that period.
Yeah, so they've dropped down right at the back. Alpine have taken a bit of a step forward as this season's progressed, but at the front end, that's what's most interesting, I think, to most people. What I'm slightly surprised at is Ferrari, who, where McLaren have gained nearly a third of a second, Ferrari have lost the same amount according to that graphic. And yet actually, I don't think it's a sort of fair representation, because it swings up and down so quickly at the moment. We're in an area of Formula One where even the teams are struggling to understand why on some days and at some circuits they're getting good performance. On another day, following weekend, it might swing. Between those top four teams, it's up and down all over the place. So I'm not sure that's quite as straightforward as graphic as it seemed. Yeah,
I mean, we've got to be careful, because obviously we're talking on the radio and the audience can't see the graphic, but I have to be honest, I'm very, very sceptical of those graphics, a lot of those graphics that Formula One put up. Some of them don't seem to make any sense to me. They're quite hard. The data doesn't seem to add up in lots of ways compared to the stuff that you can look at yourself. And they're represented in a way that isn't very clear either. So it showed Red Bull going backwards, but relative to what were they saying? Themselves? Somebody else? It was just really hard to understand what they were trying to say.
It is Red Bull's performance by Monza, which is the last race, compared to Red Bull's performance at the first round in Bahrain, is what they're suggesting.
So it must be relative to other teams, right? But anyway, it's just, I know there's obviously difficult. A lot of AI and calculations and things that my brain can't do. Probably the computers for that, the famous distribution company that sponsors Formula 1 that does the graphics can do. Even so, still sceptical of what those graphics say.
It's data, which is obviously a huge part of Formula 1 in general. Even from the team's perspective, we get so much data, and it's a really good point actually. Even the teams would say this. There's so much data available, and it's all really high quality data it's coming from the cars and from the teams, even from the circuit now. But it's how you interpret that data is key to everything. Even how the teams design their own cars with the data that's coming out of wind tunnels. You often see that data has somehow got lost in translation by the time it turns into a real car on a circuit. And we talk about this loss of correlation, which means the teams are not seeing on track in real life what they're seeing in the virtual world or their wind tunnel. And it's about how you interpret that data. So you can have all the data in the world, but if you don't read it in the correct way or take the right things from it, it's almost pointless.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's quite quiet, so you might be listening in wondering what's going on. Well, it's because most of the cars are still actually in the pits. I think the dampness that Perez reported to his team when he was going around, we heard, has basically meant that there's a bit of a delay. A lot of cars are not going out on circuit. One or two just beginning to go out, but it's pretty quiet out there at the moment, and a lot of drivers are just standing around waiting for their opportunity.
I can give you some numbers that are a bit easier to understand, if you like, Ben. So in terms of the average sort of fastest lap by any car over the course of the season, over the season as a whole, the Red Bull is the fastest car. This is the fastest lap it's done on any given weekend, so basically qualifying. The Red Bull's the fastest car by 1.13 of a second from McLaren, followed by Ferrari and Mercedes, each about another tenth behind. But in the second half of the season, from Hungary onwards, the McLaren is the fastest car by 2.5 tenths, followed by the Mercedes, followed by the Ferrari. So that, I think, that's a simple way of showing how the form has shifted. Now, some of the things aren't in there. So, for example, Verstappen's pole in Belgium, I haven't included in that because it was a wet session, and the wet skews the averages a bit too much. It makes it a bit harder to compare. So that would bring Red Bull back towards McLaren. But that just goes to show how much McLaren have moved forward over the course of the season, and commensurately how Ferrari, who started the season as the second fastest team behind Red Bull and well ahead of McLaren and Mercedes, have moved backwards relative to McLaren and Mercedes.
But the other good point, and it ties into I think what you said earlier on, is that data you're reading from there is fastest lap, as you said, so qualifying. That's not the big picture of Formula 1. It's not the big picture of even a race weekend. And Ferrari, as you said, have taken a step forward in terms of their race pace, perhaps not so good in qualifying this year. So we've seen them score great results. You can even look at Leclerc last time out, winning in Monza. That was all about his race pace and the strategy they deployed on the Sunday, as opposed to not being the fastest car on Saturday.
The other thing, Mark, is it's so close that small details in races can make a big difference. So, for example, in Hungary, everyone assumed that Piastri was the faster McLaren driver because he beat Norris at the start, got ahead and sort of built a small advantage before the pit stops. But actually, when Norris ended up in front because McLaren were playing with strategy to make sure that he wasn't passed by Hamilton, he actually looked more quicker again than Piastri had looked in the first stint. And it's all to do with dirty air and how that affects your tyre wear. And the car behind, if it's within a couple of seconds of the car in front, its tyres wear much more quickly than the car in front, and therefore it looks slower than it actually would be in clear air. And you saw something similar in Monza. Leclerc got between the McLarens on the first lap because of Piastri's overtake on Norris at the first chicane. Norris had qualified fastest ahead of Piastri. Now, Piastri then led Leclerc with Leclerc right behind him, and McLaren thought that because Leclerc was able to follow Piastri so closely, that meant that potentially the Ferrari was the fastest car in the race stint. But would that have been the case if Norris, who was the faster McLaren driver, had ended up in front on that first lap? Would he actually have been quicker than Piastri? But he couldn't show his pace again because he's stuck behind another car.
It's a really good point. And, you know, when we shifted to this current regulation set, it was all about trying to enable cars to follow each other more easily without being so affected by the dirty air. But what's happened is the engineers in Formula 1 have developed their cars because they realise that creating the dirty air is a consequence of creating a car that actually performs really well aerodynamically. You want to spit that dirty air, particularly off the front tyres, out and away from the car, but it creates this huge sort of dirty wash behind you. And over the last couple of years, that's what the development has moved towards. So we've now got back into an era where we're creating a lot of dirty air effectively. It's affecting the cars behind. They're struggling to overtake and follow, and we got back to the point which the regulations were trying to avoid. Having said all of that, the cars are now so close, it's not really detracting from the racing, but it is an interesting point.
It's also shown a failure of the change that happened between 21 and 22, because you're absolutely right. The aim of these cars was to throw that dirty air away from the car behind, and for the first year it did make following more easier, although actually overtaking wasn't that much easier, because drag was the drag of the cars was reduced, so they made less of a hole in the air, so it was harder to get closer once you were close behind them on the straight. But what has become apparent is that Pirelli was supposed to make the tyres much less sensitive to overheating and much wider operating windows, and they failed to do that. The tyres are just as sensitive to heat as they were before, and their operating window, if anything, is even narrower than it's ever been if you listen to the drivers. So it's been 12 or 13 frustrating years for Formula One trying to say to Pirelli, can you please make these tyres more like more normal racing tyres that aren't so sensitive to thermal degradation, but they haven't managed to do so far.
Still quiet out on the track at the moment in FP3. We've got just under 50 minutes to go, but nobody is putting together laps because the conditions out there are just not what they want. They want a dry track, and it's not fully dry. It's a little bit damp. We've got this rather cloudy day, so it's all a bit quiet down in the pit lane. We just saw some more graphics coming up that was quite interesting about average fastest starts over the course of the year, and Hamilton was at the top of that, 0.26 seconds off the line at the start of a race. Interestingly, though, there is a technical side to that as well as a driver's skill side to that, because the two Red Bulls were virtually the same, the two Ferraris were virtually the same, with Sainz and Leclerc, and a little lower. They were on 0.29. So the technical side of getting a car off the line is also combined with the driver's ability to have that speed of reaction.
Yeah, and I think the graphic that we saw, those times were driver reaction times, I think, according to that. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, that they are paired. The two McLarens were next to each other as well, weren't they? So it's interesting. I'd need to look a bit closer into that, because
it's impressive that Hamilton, after all his experience, was still at the top of that list.
He has a really sort of a unique way of launching off the line. You've probably seen it, people at home may have seen it on the onboard cameras, where if you ever get the shot from behind the steering wheel, he sort of holds his hand in this really awkward position, which uses his fingers, I think, as a bit of a gauge as to how far to dump the clutch in the first phase. And I don't see anyone else doing it, but it's clearly working for him.
It is working for him. Well done to Hamilton for topping that little time list we've just seen that came up on one of our graphics. A little bit of action on track. Lando Norris, that's what you're listening to right now, is the McLaren with Mercedes power, of course, that he's just out on circuit. He's just going through the early stage, turns 1 and 2, now down a straight, which, as you mentioned yesterday, Andrew, is actually, it's considered a bit of a short straight here at Baku, but it's longer than straights at quite a few other circuits that we go to. You were talking about the Hungary straight, and it's longer than that one. Then into another little sequence of right-angled corners, and that's the thing here, Mark, is that the corners mostly around this Baku circuit are not particularly fast. No. They're either flat out or they're pretty tight, slow corners, and that has been suiting Ferrari in particular, I think. Well,
to navigate those from an engineering perspective, it's all about, managing the weight transfer. So it's a lot of big stops at the end of a straight, because you're coming into a real slow right angle corner. So it's managing the braking phase, getting that weight transfer onto the front axle so you can bite really hard with the brakes without locking them. And then, of course, you've got to turn in and get through the corner. And then it's about getting onto the power from very slow speed back onto what's normally a straight again. So the traction phase is really key. It's really tough on rear tyres as a result of that, because you're always trying to light the tyres up getting out the corner. If you do light those tyres up, it negatively impacts them, it overheats them, and that cycle can really rapidly escalate quickly. So that's the real challenge from a driver and engineering point of view from around this track.
The other thing about this track is that all the corners are more or less the same. They're all left or right 90-degree corners, short duration apexes. And so we're seeing yesterday that Red Bull looked much more competitive than they did in Monza, for example, and even at Zandvoort, for example, compared to the McLaren as well. One of the reasons for that might be that Red Bull have been struggling to make their car balanced over a range of different corner types at any one time. So So the more different the corners are from each other, the harder it is for Red Bull to get that car to be balanced in the way that the drivers want it. They're struggling. It's either too nervous at the rear, or it's understeering too much. They can't find it in between. There's an Alpine stopped on the track. I wonder if that's another engine problem after yesterday. It's Esteban Ocon again, who lost an engine yesterday, and there's a red flag because of him stopped on track. But here, because the corners are all... here's Ocon's radio.
I got a problem.
Okay, mate, understood.
Don't think I can make it.
No, he has come to a halt. You're absolutely right. So, sorry, carry on, Andrew.
Yeah, no, just a final point. But because the corners are all basically the same, they're all exactly the same, but more or less the same, and or at least the greatest proportion of them are all the same, it means that it's much easier for Red Bull to get the car in the right balance window.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think Red Bull are going to be a big challenge, and Perez is certainly showing great pace. But this is a bit unfortunate for Esteban Ocon. He's having a bit of a miserable weekend so far. He had problems yesterday with the car, and now, clearly, he wasn't able to bring it back to the pits. This is tough. He's leaving the team at the end of the year. He's probably feeling quite relieved about that right now.
I was just going to say, he's sort of having a miserable year, isn't he? Because it started terribly on track, and it has improved slightly for the team as a whole. The relationship, I think, between Esteban and the team Alpine is not in the sweetest position that it could be in, and he is leaving at the end of the year, moving on. So, yeah, not a good preparation for a weekend where you really need to be on track. For all the things that we've been talking about, the uniqueness of this circuit, you need lap time, you need to get track time rather, just to get yourself in the zone. It's a little bit, although it's not quite a Monaco or a Singapore, it is similar in many regards in that the outside of the circuit is delineated by walls, and the quickest way around this circuit is to go as close to those walls as possible. You don't do that with just on your first lap. You gradually build up to it as a driver, so consistency is absolutely key, and that is the sound of him grinding to a halt.
Yeah, so we're just going through a replay, and he was accelerating out of the last corner onto the main straight, turn 16, and he tried to change up into fourth gear and it didn't, and the engine just died away, as you can hear. And there was nothing he could do about that. Couldn't keep it running. It's quite rare, actually. Usually when there's a problem, they'll go into a sort of mode that will just allow you to come back slowly, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, like a limp home mode that you get on road cars. That's right. Well, they will have their work cut out, of course, and probably well let's hold reserve judgment to see what actually the problem is. But there's only 43 minutes left of this session. The red flag is out, but the clock does continue to tick down in practice, so that's continuing to drop away. And after this session is completed, you'll have a couple of hours before getting ready for the all-important qualifying session. So really the worst preparation he could have hoped for ahead of that.
We haven't had a wet race here at Baku in the past. It's interesting that it's a little bit damp out there, and defining the fact that many cars are not bothering to go out. Marshals are heading down to try and sort out what's going on with Esteban Ocon's car, but it's needing rescue as well, so we'll have to wait for a vehicle, I think, to come around and tow it back. Ocon, we talked about his move next year, so he leaves this Alpine team and he joins Haas, so it's going to be an interesting time for Haas. And remember, the young British driver Oliver Behrman, who is with Haas this weekend, standing in for Kevin Magnussen because Magnussen had extra penalties that excluded him. It means that Ollie Behrman, who's doing a good job, will have a tough teammate in Esteban Ocon. I mean, Ocon, he's an interesting guy. He can be very talkative too. He can be quite friendly out of a car. But I tell you what, as a teammate, he can be one of the toughest teammates to be alongside.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think he's definitely got talent. I guess you caveat it by saying Ollie Behrman also looks really promising. So from an Esteban Ocon perspective, he's going to come in as the much more experienced guy. Maybe never been World Championship contending material yet, but he's definitely one that someone would say is that would naturally be a team leader at that point next year when you've got a rookie in the other car. But if he gets beaten by that rookie, if Ollie Behrman comes in and does a better job or outperforms Esteban, you can see where the negative impact on Esteban's career might come. So there's always a bit of a gamble or a risk going into a new team like that when you're the preferred or the favourite, certainly with most experience, up against a young gun. You're always going to be wary of just how good that other guy's going to be.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. We are actually looking at Ollie Behrman on camera at the moment. The youngster who is doing a great job so far, was impressive yesterday, managing to put in some good pace. In the end, Hulkenberg was a fraction faster than him in that second practice session, but for a little bit it looked like Ollie had the advantage. But right now it's still very quiet. We've got the red flag out at the moment as they try and bring Esteban Ocon's car back into the pits. And 16 years ago today, it was when Sebastian Vettel claimed his first ever Grand Prix victory to this day, which is rather nice. That first win at the Italian Grand Prix, and that was when he was racing for Scuderia Toro Rosso, a team that has changed names several times over the years, before he went to Red Bull, of course.
Yeah, that's right. That was the beginning of what we now know to be Seb's glittering career. Speaking of sort of youngsters coming into the sport with Ollie Behrman there, next year is going to be really interesting, I think, for us all to be watching on, because actually we've got quite an influx of youngsters, haven't we? We've got Ollie Behrman, we've got Jack Doohan, who will take Esteban Ocon's seat at the Alpine team. Kimi Antonelli, we know, is coming in to Mercedes, and there still could be others. We still don't know.
They're talking about Gabriele Bortoleto too, aren't they? The Formula 2 man at the moment, who he won the F3 championship, and he is doing a good job in Formula 2 as well at the moment. But it's Sauber that we're talking about, the team that will become Audi. Hulkenberg is joining them, and it's still a question. But having said that, Valtteri Bottas is still being talked about as staying there as it moves on to Audi, and it does sort of make a lot of sense that Valtteri may well be the man. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, I think Valtteri still has a lot to offer Formula 1. I think his problem is that they've already signed Nico Hulkenberg, who you'd say is a sort of similar type of, certainly in terms of experience. If you were going to build a team towards becoming Audi, for me, you want to get a young guy in there alongside the experience of Hulkenberg. Do you want another experienced guy who doesn't have longevity in his career, you'd imagine? I think you want to put a young gun in and build towards the full Audi entry in 26.
That's a good point, actually. That is a good point. Andrew, what are your thoughts? Do you think that Sauber Audi should be going for two experienced campaigners, or, as Mark was saying, one experienced and one younger?
Well, it's not my decision, is it?
Of course, but it's fun having a chat about it.
I just think
we all have opinions.
I just think it's all a bit underwhelming, the whole Audi Sauber project at the moment. They've chosen Nico Hulkenberg basically because he's German. I mean, I haven't got anything against Nico Hulkenberg, but it seems a bit bizarre in the 21st century when you're selling cars all over the world that you're a German manufacturer and you have to have a German driver in your car. It's like 20th century thinking. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I think everyone in Formula 1 thinks that the Audi project's a bit underwhelming at the moment, because Carlos Sainz didn't want to go there and he's chosen to go to Williams. Now, okay, you can argue that Williams has some promise, but they're not looking that much. I mean, okay, they are looking better than Sauber at the moment, because Sauber are really in the doldrums this year, but it's not like he was choosing between Ferrari or Mercedes and Sauber Audi. You know, he was choosing between Williams and Sauber Audi, but he still went for Williams because he thought for the next 2 or 3 years that was better for his career. Now, what does that say about what he thinks about the Audi project, especially given that his dad, the two-time world rally champion, drives for Audi in rally rates? You know, it's so. And then you look at it, you know, Audi should be coming in. They're a massive global manufacturer, the VW group, and they should be coming in with some kind of fanfare. They've already fired the chief executive and replaced him with Mattia Binotto, who definitely has a mixed reputation in Formula 1. You know, you can raise, he's a nice guy, Mattia Binotto. I like him as a person, but you can raise serious questions about his stewardship of Ferrari. He got fired by Ferrari basically because they weren't making the right strategic decisions. They weren't solving the right reliability problems. You know, there were questions about whether they were using the engine illegally in 2019, some kind of secret settlement with the FIA over that. And so, I don't know. I mean, it sounds a bit grim, right? But to say it, but Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriele Bortoleto, if that's the driver lineup next year going into 2026 for Audi, I mean, it's not exactly Hamilton and Leclerc, is it? Do you know what I'm saying?
I know. It is an interesting time, and we shall see. And of course, but going into next year, it is just a development of the current cars. It's the following year where it will really become Audi with brand new cars, of course, and they're creating their own power units too, aren't they? So that's going to be a very different story then. There's
an element of lottery to 26 because, you know, with all the talk of Adrian Newey joining Aston Martin this year and what he'll bring to the team, and I have no doubt he will bring an uplift in performance, it's largely for everybody going to be reliant, at least to some degree, quite a big one, on what your power unit does, which is all new. So the chassis is new, which Adrian at Aston will have a massive influence on. He can also influence how that power unit's integrated with the chassis, and that's a real opportunity. But the power unit itself is going to be massive in determining the competitive order. And for all the speculation up and down the grid of who's doing well at this point, it's speculation. Nobody knows because nobody's run an engine in the car yet. And I think until that point, it's impossible to try and pick out an order of who's going to be quick. We might find that Audi could somehow smash it and come onto the grid with the best power unit of everybody, and Nico Hülkenberg could be winning races and challenging for a championship. Who knows?
Getting podiums for a change.
Well, it could be, couldn't it? I mean, that's the point. No one really knows yet, and I think there's a real interest in that, but it must have made things like decisions for people like Carlos Sainz, even for Adrian Newey, perhaps really quite difficult, because where do you sort of pin your future when there's so much uncertainty about the competitive order?
I totally agree with that. Yeah, there's no way of knowing how 2026 will go, but here we are in 2024 with lots of action to enjoy. So let's focus back, because the track has reopened after the red flag when Esteban Ocon's car had to be recovered. We've actually got quite a few cars on track. It was very quiet with this sort of dampness out on circuit, nobody really going out in the early stages, but it's getting a lot busier because we are getting a little closer now to qualifying coming up in a few hours time. So I think the teams are saying, right, we need to get out, we need to get a bit of a feel for the cars no matter what the conditions are. And we're just watching Max Verstappen at the moment. He's warming those tyres up a little bit. He's on a set of soft tyres. The soft tyre very much the qualifying tyre, not so much the race tyre though. We sort of saw that yesterday. You can do one flying lap, maybe you can get a second lap out of it, but really unlikely to be used in the race. Piastri?
So very light drops of rain.
Understood. So far, we have not seen them affect the track at any point.
So the track is still not really damp, it's just that it's been a bit low on grip, and Piastri just explaining that there are a few drops around. We might get a bit more of an idea now, because I think we might actually see some laps completed, which we haven't really seen yet. Yeah,
we've got everybody out on circuit, bar the two Haas cars at the moment, and everybody on that soft tyre. So that is now working, as you said, towards dialing the car in for qualifying. The race tomorrow, we would expect the hard tyre to be the preferred tyre, generally going to be a one-stop race. So this is now all about getting this car focused on this afternoon. So that's getting the fastest possible lap time out of it when it really matters. But with such a busy track, and we'll see this again later today in qualifying, it is going to be about managing your position on track, getting the space that you need, because it's a narrow circuit at many points through this tight and twisty old part of town in particular. If you come up against another car when you're on a flying lap, it will absolutely destroy your lap. So the teams are using this time now to not only dial in the cars, but to get the engineers focused on managing gaps and positions, and those could be just as important as how quick your actual car is when it comes to quali.
Absolutely right. We're still riding on board with Oscar Piastri as he's up at the top end of the circuit, the high part, turns 14 now into turn 15 where Leclerc had his accident yesterday. It is a part of the track where we often see crashes down the hill, down into the all-important turn 16, which brings him on to the very, very long straight. Doesn't run wide. We saw Norris running wide there a few times yesterday. Didn't look quite as settled, and as Andrew had said earlier, he didn't sound too happy after free practice yesterday. Hopefully, from his point of view, they will have settled the car a little bit more, particularly in that last zone. So we're just going to get a bit of an idea on the times as Piastri is about to come over the line, and we'll just see how that compares. 1:45.476, so that's a little bit off what we were seeing yesterday, but it does show that the track is in pretty good shape. Actually, that was around the fastest time that was done in FP1 yesterday, so the track is obviously in reasonable shape.
Yeah, it will have evolved since yesterday. There are some support races here too. And I think it'll continue to evolve, of course, even as the session goes on. So particularly when we get to qualifying, assuming it stays dry, which we expect it to, the rubber really starts to go down. From the soft tyres, you get more rubber deposit on the circuit. They're obviously pushing the cars much harder at that point as well. So the circuit lap times will start to ramp up or get lower and lower as the afternoon rolls on.
Max Verstappen's gone quickest. Sainz now pops up into second place. Perez is on a lap, so's Charles Leclerc. And both Perez and Leclerc we will be watching very closely to see how they get on, because they were both going extremely well yesterday. Perez goes third for the moment. He was second to Leclerc yesterday in FP2. Let's see what Charles Leclerc does. No, he only goes fourth, actually. So he's behind both of the Red Bulls and his own teammate, Carlos.
It's very close to Ben, isn't it? Look at that. Both Verstappen and Sainz within the same tenth. Perez only a tenth behind them. Leclerc right behind Perez to like a couple of hundredths. Again, Piastri just another tenth behind him. And Alonso, actually, who's looked not too bad in the Aston Martin so far this weekend, in 6th place. Just had a little tiny update, the tiniest of updates that you could possibly have from Alpine. I think we saw Esteban Ocon stop on track with a problem. They're telling me he's got a problem.
That's helpful.
And they're going to investigate it after the session. Now, I get really annoyed about messages like that,
Great
Ben,
investigative
because
journalism.
they know. Oh, Alex Albon's gone top of the times by a mile, 8 tenths. Obviously, that just goes to show that the others weren't fully on it on their laps.
It also shows the others are cleaning the track up, like yesterday, I think.
Exactly, yeah. It really annoys me because they'll have seen on the data where the problem is. They know if it's a hydraulic leak or an engine failure or an MGUH or whatever, and they're just not saying. It's like, come on, guys.
yeah, very good. Look at that. Both Williams at the top of the timesheets by a considerable margin at the moment. So, yeah, I mean, look, we'll take that with a real pinch of salt, because I don't think anyone really expects Williams to be that far ahead of the rest of the field, but it is still positive for them with both drivers. We're at Colapinto a good 8 tenths behind Albon at the moment, but this is going to be the nature of the day, particularly with that little damp spell, a little bit of rain falling, with the limited amounts of rubber and a lot of dirt and dust, even leaves all over the circuit this morning. It's going to start ramping up, so being on track at the right time is really going to be key to getting your maximum lap time in.
I agree with that, yeah. So they've gone down to 1 minute 44s with the Williams. Yesterday, Charles Leclerc, when he set the pace in FP2, was 1:43.4, so we're about a second away. Super close to the wall yet again. Max Verstappen, they've measured it. They've got some clever systems out there, and he was 1 centimetre away from the wall on the exit of turn 15.
Well, the fastest way around this track is to be as close to the wall as you can without hitting it, and that's how you maximise the amount of circuit and the grip that's on it. So, you know, Max pushing it to the max.
Indeed, as ever. We're used to that, aren't we? So, just under half an hour to go in final practice before we build up towards qualifying in a few hours' time. At the moment, unusually, it's a Williams 1-2.
Got some other technical news for you. Joe Guan Yu has had a new energy store and control electronics fitted, and they are outside his allocation. So the man who would have qualified at the back anyway probably is going to be even further at the back because of a grid penalty.
But what that does do for them, and again, it may not have a major impact on the race, is it completely changes their strategy for the day. So there's no point in them tailoring a car towards the one-lap performance you would need for qualifying. They will go into the rest of the day now setting the car up for the race. You know, they're going to be at the back, so they may as well look at a car that's going to look after its tyres, for example, that's going to be able to overtake potentially, rather than looking at the all-out maximum performance that everyone else will be looking at for this afternoon. Yeah,
good point. Piastri's just gone second fastest, but he's still some way off that lap that Albon's done. That's a brilliant lap that Albon seems to have done. He's still 6/10 faster than Piastri. And Hülkenberg, though, has also popped up. So we're suddenly looking at all the slower teams doing well. Mind you, Leclerc's just set up the new fastest first sector of anybody. We do have a yellow flag in sector 1, so somebody's probably gone down an escape road, but Charles Leclerc is going quickly. We're also keeping an eye on Lewis Hamilton right now, who's on to some personal bests, and he's similar to the Albon pace.
Yeah, I was sort of expecting, I was hoping for good things from Mercedes, but I think there were sort of mixed messages coming out of Mercedes yesterday. They were very cautious to suggest that a lot of the other teams around them tend to take a big step forward when it actually comes to qualifying, whether that's from turning up engines or just pushing a bit harder, whereas Mercedes don't tend to take that same leap. We've got another red flag.
Yeah, we have another red flag, so Hamilton backing off. And that's a shame, actually, because Charles Leclerc was on a good lap, but so was Sergio Perez, and they've both had to back right out now. So we would have seen some big changes, I think. I think Albon would have been pushed down there, but we have now got a red flag, and we've got a crash for Ollie Behrman. Oh dear, he has made contact with the barrier down at turn 1. He'll be frustrated, because he has been saying how he knows he's building up to qualifying, and he did not want to make it, and he slaps the top of the car as he gets out. He's fine, but he is cross with himself, and you can tell.
Yeah, and things like that will, or have the potential at least, to affect your performance. That's why you need to gradually build up with this consistency, because a moment like we've had here where he's hit the wall will dent his confidence massively going into this afternoon's qualifying.
It's a strange place too, because he's hit the wall actually in the escape area, where normally if you get off the brake you can sort of get round there. We haven't seen a replay yet. Be interesting. Let's have a look at this, Mark. So he comes down to turn 1, brakes, turns in. Okay, yeah, he didn't bail out as early as some of the experienced drivers do here.
It's a sort of embarrassing accident, really, isn't it? He did seem to maybe braked a bit late, didn't make the apex, and very early into the corner realised he wasn't going to be able to make it, and was almost caught into two minds as to whether to keep going or to bail out.
Yeah.
And he ended up in no man's land, and by the time he tried to bail out, he'd run out of space and hit the wall with the left front. So, as I say, when he next steps in the car, which of course now will be qualifying, that's the next opportunity he'll get to be behind the wheel. Here he is.
Okay, Ollie. You okay?
Oh, I'm such an idiot.
Is the car damaged?
Yeah, I couldn't turn out of that time. I'm so sorry.
Hey, Ollie, you've got to deal with this. It's part of life, and everybody can make mistakes, but then come back strong, and the team will understand this as well. But it is frustrating to do it towards the end of FP3, and the time is a bit limited. Front suspension damage on that, Mark. How do you think anything worse than that?
Well, no, I don't think it'll be too much worse than that, but I don't think he won't see that car again, of course, in this session, which, as I was saying, that means the next time he gets behind the wheel will be qualifying, and you can already hear from his demeanour, he's immediately down, he's beaten himself up. His job now in the next couple of hours is to get over that, psychologically, turn his mood round and try and reinstigate the confidence he had before that point, because confidence is the biggest single thing a driver needs around a street circuit like this, and at the moment that's taken a massive hit.
Ironically, last year when he took pole position in Formula 2, he actually clipped a wall and made the steering out of alignment, but went on to take pole. Unfortunately, it's slightly more than out of alignment.
Yeah, I can see a close-up shot now. The suspension arms are all snapped, which is it looks dramatic. They snap very easily, these carbon fibre wishbones, when they take a loading that they're not designed to take. The biggest concern in anything like that is the wishbone going to punch into the side of the chassis and do damage there? But I don't think so. Only time will tell.
It was quite a glancing blow, Mark, wasn't it? He tried to bail out but didn't quite do it, and he sort of went the barrier sort of curves round there into the escape road, and he sort of caught it with the sort of left-hand side of the front wing and the front suspension, and there was a little bit of damage on the strakes I saw on the floor as well. Yeah. But fundamentally it looked reasonably light as these things go. I
also just noticed on our camera view there, as he walked back with his head down through the garage, you've only got the Netflix crew in the garage at the time, and that's the worst thing that
that's tough.
The last thing he needs.
Yes, if the Netflix crew are there, they'll be making a full story of this, of course. Well, let's see how the rest of the weekend goes for him. The 19-year-old from Chelmsford, already a point scorer in his one outing with Ferrari earlier this year when he replaced Carlos Sainz, and now he'll be feeling a little frustrated. Ironically, this is the first time he's ever done all three free practice sessions, because he only got to do he's done FP1 a few times without racing, but he only did FP3 and then straight into qualifying when he replaced Carlos Sainz in Saudi. So ironically, he's done all three, but now he's had a little shunt.
Well, he did a remarkable job of handling pressure that weekend, didn't he? And that's a good sign going into this afternoon. We talk about the pressure that's now on his shoulders to deliver something off the back of this knock of confidence. Maybe that's a good sign that maybe he's the sort of character that can handle that and will turn it around quickly. Let's hope so.
Well, let's see what happens in qualifying. We're just taking a little look at a replay of George Russell. Oh, he had some traffic up ahead of him, and he just had to back right out of it. Listen.
This guy's just in the middle of the road. Hey.
Yeah, well, that was true. Whoever it was, he got completely blocked when he was on a rapid lap there, George, and he was reporting back to the team. We've got due to have just over 22 minutes still to go in this session, and there are cars lining up on the exit of the pit lane now as we wait for the track to reopen.
About 10 seconds it says on the screens. One of the sort of difficulties of this circuit is that little incident from George Russell coming up against slow traffic there highlights is that the closing speeds, the speeds around this track, is a very fast circuit. Given that it's got some very slow corners, the bits when you're on throttle are actually very fast. So if you do come up against traffic in a very narrow section, you can still be at very high speed. So there is potential risk here around this circuit, and in the early part of qualifying, when all 20 cars are on the circuit at the same time, that is going to be something to carefully manage.
Absolutely right. Remember, with these engines, in these power units as we call them in Formula 1, the combination of electric power and internal combustion power, over 1,000 horsepower. When a driver with no traction control of any sort in a Formula 1 car is dealing with these 90-degree right and left-handers, having to go to that 1,000 horsepower as he gets onto the throttle, throttle control is still a major part of racing these days, isn't it?
Absolutely, as it should be. It's down to the driver's skill, down to their feel, maybe experience as well. But yeah, with 1,000 horsepower under your right foot and a tyre that definitely can't take that much horsepower in one go out of a slow corner, you've got to be really measured. And of course, it's frustrating as a driver. You just want to bury that throttle, don't you? We've all done it. That's how your sort of brain is relating how you're going to get quicker. But you have to be tempered with that. You've got to be patient, and that's the real key. The younger drivers are the ones that find that harder, of course. You have to learn that skill to be patient. It often comes with experience.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that Sergio Perez likes. It's something that really suits him well. He's great on street tracks, and this particular track has always worked well for him. Currently he's down in 7th place, but we're going to see quite a lot of changes, I think, as long as we get through the rest of this session without any more red flags. And we may well get some more, because they are all starting to push a bit harder now. They know that qualifying is coming up later, and that will be crucial. It's not a Monaco circuit at all, in that if you don't qualify up front, forget the race, because there's always overtaking opportunities here. Quite often there are safety car periods where you can make an extra pit stop and gain a lot of places. This is a street circuit where you can really make some differences no matter where you qualify.
It is, but it's actually overtaking tends to be a bit harder than you would expect. So remember last year, for example, when Verstappen was stuck behind Perez, just couldn't get close enough to. He was definitely within the 1.5 second range, which is the sort of getting close to being able to overtake, but he just could not get close enough to try and pass. Actually, it worked out really well for him, because once he realised he couldn't get past, he then spent the rest of the Grand Prix playing around with settings, and it completely changed his season around. He understood lots of things about how to get the best out of that Red Bull car. And if you remember, Azerbaijan last year was the 4th Grand Prix of the year, and it was 2 wins each for Verstappen and Perez when they left Baku, and Perez didn't win again.
That's right, yeah.
In fact, almost nobody did, apart from Verstappen, for one race in Singapore when Carlos Sainz was Ferrari. But anyway, just to say that you would think with the long straights that overtaking was easy. It is. You never know, but it isn't as easy as you would think.
But one of the aspects, we're just running on board with Lando Norris here, is actually starting from pole is not always the advantage here, because when the DRS comes in on the opening laps, sometimes pole drivers do get away, but quite often they're under attack immediately, so sometimes it's best not to be on pole.
Yeah, very true. And the other element, I think I'm right in saying, is they've extended the DRS zone to try and aid that overtaking here. The main straight DRS zone, I think they've extended it by about 100 metres, so it's just to try and make sure we get the overtaking with the benefit of DRS. So yeah, you're right. It's about, when you at the start of a race, if you are on pole, you need to get away and break that DRS zone. We know that from this year, the DRS comes in at the end of the first lap as opposed to the end of lap 3. So it's even more of a, got to get a hurry up, haven't you, if you're on the front row?
Yeah, absolutely right. It can work sometimes if second and third are battling for the position as they go into the first corner. It allows the pole driver to get away. But let's wait and see. So Hülkenberg is about to cross the line. He's third fastest. He's done a 1:44.6, but the fastest right now is Lando Norris. So Lando Norris has gone back up to the top of the times after a difficult day yesterday. The McLaren showing better pace, but we are seeing a lot of improvements. So the track is getting quicker and quicker. I think we're going to go right down to the checkered flag here to effectively see the best times. They are on soft tyres, and of course they can't do too many laps without those tyres starting to wear away a touch. Lewis Hamilton, we're just having a little look at a replay on board with Lewis Hamilton, whether there was any kind of incident, I'm not sure. Lewis currently a little further, yes, he went down an escape road. Okay, so no damage done to the car. He's down in 14th place. He had to do a nice little neat spin to bring the car back on track. Alex Albon going quick again, another fastest sector.
Yeah, it's the sound that you can hear is on board with Alex Albon, and he is. This Williams is very, very fast. He's gone through the middle sector of the circuit now faster than anybody else. He's also now coming into this really long, flat-out section where the Williams tends to be quick. You can hear the intonation of the engine just rise a little bit as DRS opens, and he's also got a tow as well. Coming down the final part of that straight, crosses the line and goes quickest by 0.6 of a second.
But not for long. Leclerc, and Andrew was pointing at him just a moment ago, I noticed. Leclerc's gone even faster, 1:43.4. Sainz not quite as quick as his teammate, but he goes third. Tell you what though, Albon's lap still remarkably impressive, because he has split the two Ferraris the way it is right now, and the Williams is working effectively around here. Norris has now been pushed down to 4th.
It's a good opportunity for Williams and Franco Colapinto as well. He's been brought in, of course, to try and do a better job than Logan Sargent was doing, both in terms of scoring points and also trying not to bend the car around here, which is tough around Baku, particularly as a rookie. But the car has got performance, and enough performance potentially to try and get a point or two here, which will be massively valuable for a Williams team and might sort of justify the decision to bring him in for the remainder of the season. So there's a lot of pressure on Colapinto's shoulders, but also a big opportunity.
I agree. No, and it's really good seeing some of these youngsters coming in, like Behrman as well, even though he's had the little error in this session. It's great to see how they're getting on. Verstappen's on a lap, no quicker than Leclerc in the first sector, but it is a reasonable lap that's coming together for him. So we'll watch that. Hamilton and Perez, all of them on quick laps at this stage, so we are getting a bit more indication. As ever, Yuki Tsunoda's done a good lap. He's currently 5th. He does seem to go well here at Baku. He's another driver who really suits this circuit. Verstappen on target now to beat Leclerc.
Yeah, so middle sector, he's now gone very, very quickly. So that's the sector of the lap where Verstappen's car, that Red Bull, has kind of come alive. It looked in the first sector, as I was watching his onboard, he had a bit of understeer coming through the high-speed corners, which I know Verstappen particularly hates. He likes the car to be really sort of planted at the front end. But around here, it's quite a tricky thing. The circuit's quite low grip anyway. But the car's certainly come alive. The middle sector being his strongest. He's gone second quickest, about a 10th behind Leclerc in the Ferrari.
It's exactly the same pattern there, Mark and Ben, as yesterday.
Yeah.
Verstappen's quick in the middle sector, and then he loses time relative to his competitors, Ferrari particularly on the straight. It looks to me like Red Bull has stuck with that slightly higher downforce setup, Ben, that they were running yesterday. And Perez has gone fastest though, but that could pay dividends for them in the race. Even if they can't qualify on the pole, downforce is better for your tyre degradation.
Yeah.
They'll keep it under control, especially on a track where there's low grip and you might be sliding. You might get surface temperature peaks, but the core of the tyre loses its temperature. So that's what Red Bull are thinking with that slightly higher downforce setup.
We're listening to Oscar Piastri's McLaren right now, and he's on a good lap. He's just set the fastest sector in that opening sector of anybody. He's now in sector 2 into the vital turn 15 before it plunges downhill. Looks neat and tidy. It's after the next corner that we get a time on the second sector, or in fact we've got it already. Yeah, and he's definitely on target to beat Perez. So the McLaren is working well. We saw Norris jump up. He's now been pushed down to 7th, but Piastri, I think, is going to set a new fastest lap as long as he's got the straight line speed. It's clearly got the corner speed. This is where we find out.
Yeah, exactly. We're about to find out now. He's on this flat out section. It's over 2 kilometres where the right foot is buried as hard as the driver can into the floor. He does cross the line. It's 6/10 quicker than what Perez could do. So we'll take into account that the circuit is evolving and getting quicker every single lap as it's cleaning up and getting rubber laid down, and those light spots of rain that we saw earlier seem to have disappeared now. The circuit's going to get quicker and quicker and quicker. So there's definitely a caveat with this. With each one of these flying laps now, 13 minutes left on the clock, has the potential to be faster than ones that have gone before. But that's a really strong marker from Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, that's very impressive to go 6/10 faster than Sergio Perez into the 142s. Last year, however, in qualifying, Leclerc got into the 140s. So he did a 140.203 to take pole last year. The track hasn't been quite so clean. Russell?
Just check the PU. Something feels and sounds a little bit funny. Mainly under braking and off throttle.
Hey, Phil.
So George just reporting back to the team that he's not quite comfortable about something to do with the power unit.
Yeah, I was just going to say PU, of course, he's referring to the power unit. Drivers do often hear things. It's quite common that you start to hear things that maybe that it's just the team have introduced a new setting for those phases of the power unit's usage, and it just sounds a little bit different through the exhaust. So it may not be that it's actually a problem. It could just be something new that he's not necessarily aware of. But they will go and have a look, and I'm sure refer back to him. But he's currently sitting in 8th place, ahead of his teammate. So Hamilton down in 10th, Russell in 8th, and they are both on outlaps now, and this, as I said earlier, is going to get quicker and quicker anyway, just in terms of circuit evolution. But I was really, as I said earlier, hoping for a little bit more from Mercedes around here. I was thinking this could be a bit of an opportunity for them, particularly with the cooler temperatures, as Andrew said earlier on. That really tends to suit the way that the Mercedes uses its tyres. So we'll see what they got. This is an opportunity to see what they've really got in hand here as they both make their way round, getting temperature into tyres, brakes, getting those engine temperatures under control, and then they'll go for it.
Absolutely. Mercedes have done well here over the years, having had 3 poles, 3 wins, two wins from pole. They're the only team that have ever managed to take wins from pole position here in the past. Of course, they were a very dominant team at one point. Bottas a winner with them, and Nico Rosberg as well, also the winner of the first ever race that was held here. It was run as a European Grand Prix for the first ever race here in 2016. And he took the victory on that occasion. But as you say, Mercedes not looking quite so strong here as we might have expected. Piastri currently fastest for McLaren, Perez second for Red Bull, third place Leclerc for Ferrari, with Mercedes down, as you mentioned, in 8th and 10th places. We're on to a lap now. This will give us a bit more of an indication, won't it, from George Russell?
Yeah, absolutely. So he's gone through turn 1, he's already messed it up. So into turn 2, braked a bit too late, just couldn't get the car stopped, and he's had to immediately bail out of the lap and go down the escape road. So
both Hamilton and Russell now have found problems where they've braked late and they've both gone straight on. So have they changed something on the car, or is it just the grip levels, do you think?
Well, what we're seeing in Formula 1 as a whole this year, I think I mentioned it just a small briefly earlier on, is that we're seeing a real sort of fluctuation in terms of how the teams are managing tyre temperature. I mean, Andrew mentioned this very small window that Pirelli have given, the sensitivity around when a tyre works and when it doesn't. And teams, even the very best and most experienced teams, some of them finding it hard from one weekend to the next to just get the tyre into that window. And just being outside of it by a very small amount can massively affect your performance, both positively and negatively.
The ride feels terrible down the straight and the braking.
It does feel as though they may have made some changes for today, but he's not enjoying it, George Russell.
It's got the hallmarks from that comment and what we've just seen of the front end being a bit too stiff, so maybe a little bit bumpy. It's a bumpy circuit, of course, it's a street track, so if he says it feels horrible down the straight, the ride, and then you get on the brakes and that little oscillation that you get with a very stiff front end might just allow the front end to lock up, and he slid off into the runoff zone.
The Friday into the Saturday for a team is always a lot of work, isn't it? There's a lot of analysis done on FP1, FP2, simulation work done back at the factory. They'll sometimes come up with a plan that they then do make some major changes to the cars for this third practice session. But then they've got to be cautious because you don't have a huge amount of time to completely rejig the car for qualifying.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a big factor because you don't want to be changing anything dramatically ahead of going into qualifying. As I said, it's about building up to that gradually, particularly on this type of track. But yeah, over a Friday, I mean, what you really hope is there's not too much work required. You hope you're going to get out the car out the box on Friday and it's quick. But if it isn't, then you're working all night back at the factory, running simulations, a driver in the loop in the simulator back at base, just running lap after lap after lap, trying different things and just seeing what effect it has. And then you come to Saturday morning, where we are right now in FP3, and it's the first opportunity to see how those changes translate into reality. You hope, of course, it solved all your problems, but it's very rare that it's that simple.
Hamilton has just gone second fastest, but it's a big gap to Piastri, over half a second. Meanwhile, Leclerc has set the fastest first sector again, as we've seen quite often over the course of this weekend. He's now in the second sector, and he's very much on target with Piastri's time. It now depends on straight line speed from the Ferrari, which has been pretty good throughout the course of the weekend so far. So I would think he's going to be very much there or thereabouts. Maybe he's going to take that top spot. Perez, meanwhile, has just gone faster than Hamilton. So Perez moves up to second place, just a little bit off the fastest. And yes, Leclerc does go quickest.
Yeah, he does. And that sort of, tallies with what we saw yesterday when it really matters. We're at the end of FP3 now, 7 minutes to go. This is the final prep ahead of qualifying. We expected Leclerc and Ferrari to be fast around here. Traditionally, they have been. The team seems to be in a pretty good place right now, particularly in the hands of Leclerc, and he was quick yesterday, so maybe not a big surprise. And of course, the circuit is getting quicker all of the time, but that's a good little marker to lay down for Charles Leclerc.
Pierre Gasly tried to get out of the way. He managed it, actually, into turn one. We're just looking at a replay. It's always tricky when you come out of the pits, and he did a good job there, actually, I think. He stopped to let the Red Bull come past him, and I don't think he slowed anybody down, so well done to Pierre Gasly, always a tricky one. Did he then manage to stop? No. We stayed on board, and I thought, why are we staying on board? And I thought, I know, he didn't go to the next corner. No, he didn't.
Yeah, it is a real tricky thing. You know, you're going from very high speed into these on a bumpy street circuit, and let's not underestimate that. There are bumps, there are white painted lines, there are the normal street furniture with drain hole covers and these kind of things all over the track. You can unsettle your car, particularly if it's really stiff, which these modern Formula One cars are. There's not a lot of give in the suspension. Hit a little bump in a different place and it can easily lock the front tyres, and you can go sailing on past the corner.
Albon's just done another good lap. He's gone 5th. Russell has gone 3rd. So we now have Leclerc fastest, Piastri 2nd, Russell 3rd, Perez 4th, Albon 5th, and he's just had a round of applause from the Williams team, quite rightly so. This is fabulous. I'm really looking forward to qualifying later. The fact that the Williams car, particularly in the hands of Alex Albon, is doing so well. Franco Colapinto is a bit further down the order. He's down in 15th place. And just to give you a bit of an update on some of the teams that are struggling, no surprise, I'm afraid, for Sauber. They're down towards the bottom end. Alpine, Ocon not getting a time in because he had that problem with his car, so he's down near the bottom. But Gasly's not doing anything better. He's down in 17th place, and we sort of thought that Alpine were going to struggle here. They certainly are, and we'll just have to see how the Haas team get on. They were looking good yesterday. Hulkenberg's only 14th now, although he put in some quick laps earlier. And of course, Ollie Behrman, he's having to sit and watch as they repair. Well, they haven't got his car yet, but they'll have to repair it in time for qualifying.
Just watching Lando Norris, who's on a flyer now. It's faster than he's gone before, but it's certainly not going purple yet. But the middle sector, I think, is where that car starts to come alive a little bit earlier on. So he goes into that middle sector now. First sector was okay, a couple of tenths off what Leclerc was able to do. He's now in the middle sector. This is where I think the McLaren is really strong. But the Ferrari was also pretty quick through there as well. So it looks nice and tidy, nice and close to the wall. Whether it's close enough, whether he's pushing hard enough, is there even some time left on the table? He comes up to the very narrow section between the castle wall. Such a dramatic place for a Formula One track to come through there, over the crest and down towards turn 15, I think it'll be next. No, sorry, got that wrong. Where is he?
Yeah, you're right. That's
turn 15.
Yeah.
So into there, nice and tidy. That's where Leclerc went into the wall there, but Norris got that absolutely right. We'll get a reading. So very close now. The middle sector was good for Norris, and he's closed the gap right up to just under a tenth. They're going into the final part of the lap, flat out all the way, and we'll see where it puts him on the timing sheets.
Absolutely right, yes. This is a good lap by Lando Norris. He is going to be right up near Charles Leclerc, no doubt about it. Franco Colapinto, by the way, has done another job in the other Williams. He's gone 7th, only a fraction slower than Albon. So both Williams in the top 10, and Norris goes 2nd fastest. Very close to Charles Leclerc, and we've got a wonderful battle up there. We've got a Ferrari on top at the moment, 2 McLarens, then the Red Bull of Verstappen ahead of Russell.
Yeah, it is really quite close, and as I said, I'm also excited for this afternoon because it's very difficult to call at this point. There's still going to be a little bit of a tweaking and turning up of engines. Red Bull, we know, definitely do that when it comes to qualifying, so they don't show their hand entirely at this point in the day.
This was huge. What he just did was crazy.
So that's Carlos Sainz complaining about Perez, who was in front of him on the approach to that vital turn 15, and Perez stayed out on the racing line instead of getting out of the way, and so Carlos actually cut through the inside of the corner.
Yeah, and it is quite a fast corner, that turn 15. I mean, it's often down to the teams to be telling their driver, of course. The driver themselves don't necessarily have much of a clear view behind them. They don't know where other cars are or what kind of lap they're on, so the teams have to inform them that could end up being a little slap on the wrist for Sergio Perez. But the Ferrari looking strong. Of course, that lap there for Carlos Sainz utterly ruined by that moment with Sergio Perez, but Ferrari generally looking quite strong, certainly in the hands of Leclerc.
It's all part and parcel of qualifying later, because it's not, as you said, it's not just about getting the best lap in. It's getting a clear lap. Yeah. It's not getting messed up by other people. This could easily happen. The Mercedes are both on track at the moment. George Russell doing a nice little wobble there, just to make sure he had tyre temperature on both sides, I think.
Yeah, the real sort of challenge here is getting the clear lap, so not being obstructed by the cars. But the toe is so powerful along that long, fast section that you really want it and you need it. It could give you a couple of tenths, and that can massively change your grid position given how close things are. So I mean, it's a very difficult thing to orchestrate. You can just occasionally do it between teammates. You can send your cars out together and try and make it happen, but it's a dangerous game to play. It can go horribly wrong, as George Russell now goes quickest. This circuit is going to, as I said, continually get quicker and quicker. So we'll take the lap times themselves with a slight pinch of salt, because the evolution is massive here. But of course, it will be the same this afternoon, and it may well be the last guy out on track that has the best opportunity in the sessions of qualifying later.
As long as you don't then get a red flag. Yeah, exactly. It's always so unpredictable, but you're spot on. That was a good lap by George Russell, but the track is getting quicker and quicker and quicker all the time. Some of the tyres are getting more worn than others because they've been out for longer. We've only got a minute and a half to go. You're listening to Sergio Perez right now, and Perez is on a decent lap. We've got a yellow flying in sector 1. That won't affect him. He doesn't have to back off because he's in sector 3. Charles Leclerc again on another decent lap. Everybody still finding a bit more grip from the track every lap they go around, and Sergio Perez now absolutely flat out. He's at 210 miles an hour as he comes over the line, and yeah, that was a decent lap, but it doesn't actually change anything. He stays down in 6th place, and Leclerc, a better lap, not quite as quick as Russell. The tyres are definitely past their best when they've done several of these.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of these are laps on used tyres now. The soft tyre, which, as you said earlier on, doesn't tend to last, or certainly not to give its best after its first flying lap. So that'll be a part of this effect as well, but very, very close. The times are nothing between them. And as I said, this is not, I don't think, the maximum we're going to see through circuit evolution and driver evolution as you build more and more confidence. On a track like this, even in practice now, you are not pushing to the max. I don't care what anyone says, there's a little bit more to come from the driver when it gets into qualifying, because you cannot take the risk at this stage.
No, absolutely right. So we shall see how it goes. The checker flag is about to come out onto this session to end free practice 3 here. We're just having a little look back, replay. Daniel Ricciardo, what was he up to? Little touch with the wall, was it? Oh, I think he just missed it.
Very close, but it was a little snap of oversteer, so he ran very close. I'm not sure it was the fastest way around the circuit, but yeah, very, very close to the wall.
And Nico Hulkenberg, we're just looking at a replay. You're listening in right now. I think this was probably just a straight on down an escape road, because he didn't get the braking sorted. Did he turn it around okay? Ooh, nearly.
Oh, that's embarrassing. He tried to do a donut to get himself out of trouble and ended up having to do a 3-point turn.
Checker flag is out. George Russell has set the pace. There are 1 or 2 people still on laps at the moment, so we'll see whether this changes. Max Verstappen has done the first sector, just coming down into the second, and he's actually potentially going to go quicker. So Max Verstappen, who was fastest in FP1 yesterday, dropped away a little bit in FP2. He was only 6th fastest, but he has got a tow from his teammate as well, not from Malone, but that might have helped.
It might have helped. I mean, he looked like it was almost a bit of a surprise the way he crept up behind him out of the corner there, but we'll see as he crosses the line, coming down the straight now to take the checkered flag himself. It's improvement in time, I think, but not in terms of position, so he still remains 5th. So we're not seeing a dominant Red Bull, and we've come to expect that in recent times, but as I said earlier, I think there's still a little bit more to come typically from Red Bull when they get into the meaningful session of qualifying.
Gasly crosses the line, but doing a good run at the end there. He's still down in 15th place, and I think very little chance really for both Gasly and Ocon to make it through out of Q1 later on today. But George Russell has ended up with the fastest time, so we've had 3 different drivers set the fastest pace in the practice session so far this weekend. Verstappen in free practice 1, Leclerc in free practice 2, and it's George Russell who has now set the pace in free practice 3. In the low-speed corners, it is Verstappen that is being shown as being fastest by 0.15 of a second over Leclerc. Norris, Russell, not so quick through the low-speed corners, Russell, but it clearly worked on the straight lines because he has set the outright pace of everybody. So let's just go through that list then. Charles Leclerc, who we always know is going to be a challenger for pole position. He's looking for his 4th consistent pole here at Baku this weekend. He's 2nd fastest. Lando Norris 3rd, Piastri 4th. The 2 McLarens both rapid, and we've just got a bit of an onboard with Lando Norris at the end of the session. Did he run wide again? Yeah, out of turn 16. He has a bit of a habit of doing that, but it didn't do any damage, and he just backed out of it. So Norris 3rd, Piastri 4th, then Verstappen in 5th place currently, but definitely competitive. Carlos Sainz 6th, And remember, at Monza, we saw the top 6 separated by only 0.186 of a second. So whether that's going to happen here or not, I don't know. Sergio Perez 7th, and then brilliant effort from Williams. Alex Albon in 8th place, and Franco Colapinto in 9th, with Lewis Hamilton completing the top 10. Just having another little look at a replay of Max Verstappen going up through the very narrow, tight section up past the historic buildings here at Baku, but I think he managed to do it all neat and tidily. Oh, he just touched the wall, thankfully without too much damage. 11th, just outside the top 10, we have Fernando Alonso for Aston Martin, Yuki Tsunoda 12th, Lance Stroll in the other Aston 13th, Daniel Ricciardo 14th ahead of Pierre Gasly, who put that lap in at the end for Alpine, but it didn't really work. Nico Hülkenberg for Haas in 16th place ahead of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu in the Saubers. And then, of course, we had 2 drivers who didn't get a chance to really do very much at all. Esteban Ocon with a mechanical problem with his car, and Oliver Behrman, the young British driver who's getting his 2nd ever Formula 1 Grand Prix weekend in the Haas this time. He will be driving for Haas next year, but he crashed out down at turn 1. But I have to say, what a qualifying session we have to look forward to later, Mark.
Well, that's it. I think none of us can be particularly clear about what the actual finished pecking order is here. It's still up in the air. There's a lot still to play for. A lot of time, I think, still to come from both the circuit and the drivers. There'll be a lot of head scratching from some. Lewis Hamilton's down in 10th while his teammate was quickest. That's a question to be answered. I can't wait to see how it plays out.
No, nor me. I'm really looking forward to this. It could be wide open, and particularly with the ability for cars to end up against the wall, a red flag coming out or yellow flag at a crucial moment where somebody has to back off when they're on the fastest lap around here. It can change everything. So I do hope that you're going to be able to join us for qualifying in a little while. Qualifying starts at 1 o'clock UK time. We'll be on there at 5 to 1. So join us later. It's going to be a big battle. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.